why go to university when there's no courses in game design? I've got a game here. I want to try, at least try. And so I told my former tutor, I'm not going to go to university. I'm going to try and get my game published instead. And he just turned around and, Andy, you're good. You're not that good.
Oh.
And it was like, nothing has driven me on more than that sentence. And I was determined to prove him wrong.
I had a very similar experience in a grammar school. I want to be an actor. You'll never be an actor. You've got no talent. And I was like, well, what did I tell you?
Iain, I write a column for Retro Gamer. I do a little podcast called Random Access Memories, and I'm thrilled to talk to two really important developers, game writers. Don't laugh at that, Andy. It's true. You've shaped the zeitgeist to a certain extent. Big round of applause, please, for Andy Davidson and Stuart Cook. Lovely to have you here. People always go, well, they don't need any introduction, and then do an introduction. So I'm going to do an introduction because it would be rude not to. Stuart, let's start with you.
Okay.
Give us a few of the titles of some of the games that you've worked on that people here might have heard of.
Okay. Some of the titles I was involved with were like WWF WrestleMania, which back in the 80s and 90s was even more massive than it is nowadays. We were involved with a game called Alfred Chicken, which is famous/infamous for Alfred Chicken standing for MP down in Brighton at the time. That was quite a good publicity stunt. The game sold really, really well, so I don't know if that was part of it or anything else like that. I was involved in a lot of film and cartoon licenses. I wrote Scooby-Doo and Tom and Jerry games and things like Defenders of the Earth and Count Duckula and things like that.
Okay, and we're going to get into a more detailed history in a bit. Andy, I can't remember the name of the game you worked on, Andy. It was Worms, shall we say?
Yeah, invertebrates.
Invertebrates. And Worms is one of those games that has seeped out of the world of gaming. I was speaking to a friend today who's not a gamer, and they said, what are you doing? I said, I'm off to interview some people that make games. Oh, anything I would have heard of? And I said, well, Worms. And they knew Worms.
Because in my head it's still a little game I made for me and my mates.
Right.
So it's really hard to get my head around the fact that it's gone around the world and things like this.
Yeah. Is it weird? Let's start with you, Andy. Is it weird? What is it? Is it the 30th anniversary of Worms?
30, yeah.
30 years this year. Could you ever have imagined, when you were just a wee boy, you must have been about 12 when you wrote it, that you were 30 years later, you'd be sat in a room full of people talking about that game you made?
No, so that's the thing I'm most proud of is its longevity, basically. So I think if you're creating something, the thing you aspire to most is something which can survive the passage of time and not be like a flash in the pan or a fad and things. So the fact that people are still having tournaments on the original Amiga version is amazing.
Yeah.
And so I'm doing an update to it at the moment to sort of keep it alive and everything. We've got some collaborations, got like a Turrican level, Rough and Tumble, a Lamasoft level with permission from Jack.
Oh, wow.
So, and my Amiga's just being gutted at the moment and having its case changed. So providing it's not broken, we'll be able to see that later.
Is there ever a part of you that goes, oh Jesus, not Worms again, please? Can we talk about something else? Do you ever get...
No, because I lived it and breathed it.
Yeah.
And ever since I first touched a computer when I was like 9 years old, and my form teacher had a VIC-20 in his classroom.
Yeah.
And that was before they sort of really been pushing computers into schools. He was a bit ahead of his time. And it just seemed like magic to me.
Yeah.
Just like to be able to, like, sat there connected to a television screen and you could make things move around and control them on a television screen. And trying to explain that to people now, you can't really, because everyone takes it for granted. But it was magic. And as soon as I saw that, it just captured my imagination. And I started to try and write a scramble game, which I didn't know what I was doing. I couldn't make the screen scroll or anything, but it's something just caught my imagination then, and I knew then the only thing I ever wanted to do in life was to make a game and hopefully get it published.
A lot of this I want to know about bedroom programmers. My first computer was a Dragon 32, and I remember we were allowed to stay up late one night because Dad brought it home, and we'd had Binatone, Pong machines. But you're right, the first time you could type stuff, for me it was typing stuff that came up on the telly.
Yeah.
It was magic.
Yeah, it was pure magic.
Yeah.
And it's like nothing's ever had that effect on me.
Yeah.
And yeah, if something's in your blood, then I guess it's in my blood.
Yeah. So Stuart, let's talk about you. What was your kind of first relationship with video games, with computers? How did they get into your world?
I'm old enough to have been around in the 1970s when the arcades were coming up, and they were all in black and white, even the arcade machines, and the up periscope type games and the racing games that just had lines going sideways in one single car, and you just had to avoid the lines as they came towards you. And I got fascinated by the games back then. And I got a Binatone system in the 1970s, I think it was 75 or so, and I was just hooked, like a lot of people were in these kind of things, and I wanted to do exactly the same thing. I wanted to write these games, but there was no way of doing it at the time. And eventually, about 1980, computers started getting cheap enough that you could get them and afford them, but they weren't particularly cheap at the time, and I bought myself a VIC-20. And it had BASIC on it, but one of the beauties of BASIC on the VIC-20 at the time was it had, apart from the usual if-else and print type statements, it had peek and poke, which was basically read and write from the hardware of the machine. And that was basically when I started learning to program a computer properly. There were limits obviously back then to the machine. It didn't have smooth scrolling, it didn't have hardware sprites and so on. And I did a lot of typing in from magazines, which was actually really good because a lot of the magazines had mistakes in them and the typing at the time. So it was a really good way to learn because you'd spend all day typing that in only to discover it didn't work.
Or it was a really good way to get pissed off because you would spend...
That could have been that, yeah.
But for me, that was the thing. I would type in games and it wouldn't work and I would be annoyed. But you saw that as a challenge.
Yeah, I did. I really enjoyed the challenge. I mean, when I first started doing it, it was a bit like, oh, what am I doing? And then I just read whatever books I could find at the time. I mean, I was a guy up in Aberdeen. I'm disconnected from everything at the time. I didn't know any other developers, programmers, or anything like that in the early days. I did eventually meet some through the computer club in Aberdeen, but I don't think it existed in 1980. I don't think it started until the year after. So I just persevered and tapped away, changed the code that did work, and eventually figured out what to do with these listings.
Were you a fan of Aberdeen, the football club?
I've never been a huge football fan, but in 1983, Alex Ferguson was in charge of Aberdeen. So about that time, it was pretty good for Aberdeen.
I think
They've
that
not
was
been very good since.
I think that was the year my cousin was playing for Aberdeen, Doobie Rugby, wasn't it?
Right.
Yeah, there we go.
I remember.
You're going off on tangents too many. What is it, we'll start with you, what is it about your brain that made you look at a game and go, I want to do that, and actually do it? Because of course most people, when they saw video games, went, oh, this is great, I'll play some more. But there's something about the way you two are programmed, for want of a better word, that pushed you in the direction of, yeah, I'm actually going to make a game. Do you want to start with that?
Yeah, I can do. Partially it's because I've always liked maths, and that helps an absolute ton because it's logic basically, and computers are incredibly logical. You can't make a mistake in a computer. You make a mistake, it will crash or glitch out or whatever. And just generally it's just the challenge in creating puzzles and creating life, if you like, creating a little world for other people to play. And I really wanted to do that. Like I said, I didn't know exactly where to start to begin with, but you can see things in your head that you want to create.
Go on, Andy. Was that
similar, but like for me, I was just obsessed with games, not just computer games, but like playground games, like British Bulldog, which is obviously banned now, but that was a good game. That was a good game. And if you remember Block, where you had to guard a tree, Block is called Block 1, 2, 3, where we were.
Oh, okay. We had a slightly different name, but yeah.
And so I combine that with Tag. So instead of just one person on his own guarding the tree, you had he had two people in his team. One was the tagger, and so then all the other people were trying to get to the tree. But if one person tagged a person trying to get to the tree, he swapped sides.
Yeah.
And the game got really popular, and like the whole school ended up playing it and everything. And I was just fascinated. I just love games.
Right.
And I used to try and make like variations on Bulldog and things like this. And so when you've got a computer, so when you've got a computer, suddenly you this whole sort of world opened up. I know.
That's really interesting. So you were designing games in the playground?
Yeah.
Wow. But we are having a game of British Bulldog in the car park after this. So pick your sides. It's going to be very Squid Games. So, okay. So less people will die, hopefully. So you were making games in the playground. Then computers came along. You went, oh, I can transfer that and put it on this.
And it's like I can remember like I always analysed how sort of games worked. Like some of the earliest memories was the Game and Watch. And so I'd always analyse, like, you know, because they were quite simplistic, because obviously, you know, they were LCD and like pre-drawn graphics. But I'd always sort of try and see which had the deepest game and would compare one against the other one. And it's just always been something that's fascinated me.
Yeah.
And the chance, and then maths also came into it, because that's why I loved artillery games with the physics.
Yeah.
And I think that was going back to the Spectrum and typing in listings.
Yeah.
And that just caught my imagination, the actual physics involved in it. And and then when I had so I'm rambling a bit.
No,
so
you're not rambling. This is all great. Honestly.
I'm not very used to doing this. But we got, me and my friend got Casio graph plotting calculators.
Right.
And they were the clamshell ones. They were the first ones that were actually decent. And they had a really rudimentary programming language in it. And A-level maths was just doing my head in at the time. I couldn't stand it. And I'd worked really hard for GCSEs and everything, but it wasn't taking me to what I wanted to do, because there were no courses in game design.
Yeah.
So it seemed to me a waste of time. So me and my friend challenged each other to see if we could make a game on this Casio calculator. And so because I loved artillery games, I managed to write a little mini artillery game on it with a randomly generated landscape and everything.
Wow.
And so I won the competition, and then I thought, well, hang on a minute, especially designing the landscape fascinated me, because I love games that don't repeat. And that was always my dream, to try and make a game where every time you play it was different. And so the randomly generated landscape was key to that. And so I managed to persuade the art teacher to put an Amiga in the art room to do art on it. But while he wasn't looking, I ported the game over from the calculator to the Amiga. And obviously on the Amiga, you had so much more power at your disposal.
Yeah.
The hardware scrolling and things like this. So I made the tanks move around, added in water for an instant kill. And that's when it became a sort of challenge to myself. Well, hang on, mate, this is getting more interesting than the standard artillery game. Let's see how far we can push it, how deep we can make it.
We'll come to how far you pushed it in a second. I want to come back to you, Stuart. So Andy's first game, or one of his first games, was on the scientific calculator. It was an artillery style game. What was your first game?
My first game was actually something called Sky Raider. Well, if you ignore the typing in the VIC-20 and trying to create like basic games on the VIC-20, the very first game I ever wrote was a snake game on the VIC-20, and it was quite good. Your snake got longer and longer. A bit random pieces of your snake would disappear to give you a chance to go through yourself, basically.
Yeah.
Because if the snake got too long without that effect, basically you would end up ramming yourself, basically, and the game would always end at a certain point. So again, logic problems trying to overcome, you know, how to make gameplay work. But I got a Commodore 64 because I knew it was coming up in 1983, I think it came out, and I got one almost immediately. And I was fascinated because that had extra hardware features, and that was what really got me into trying to learn to program games properly. You know, it had hardware sprites, it had smooth scrolling, it had a sound chip, which was amazing for the time. So the very first game I ever wrote was something called Sky Raider, and I couldn't afford an assembler or anything like that. So I literally had a hex editor, which I'd managed, I can't remember where I got it from nowadays, but it was something that I managed to get hold of for free. And I typed in the codes one by one. It took me 4 months to write this game. And it was one of those ones, because you were writing with a hex editor, if you ran out of memory, one of the subroutines you were doing, because another one was in the way in the memory, all I did was put a jump routine, and I made it go around what existed, and this kind of got bigger and bigger, so it was messy as anything. It was a shoot 'em up, and it was a sideways scrolling shoot 'em up, and it was pretty glitchy, because it was all hand-coded, literally hand-coded, but it worked, and it was my first version that I did, that I thought, yeah, I can code, and I think I'll go forward with this, because a bit like yourself, I knew what I wanted to do from the second I picked up a computer. I mean, I'm still coding computers nowadays. I'm not in the games industry anymore, but I'm still coding, so that gives you an idea from that point of view. But the first published game I had was called Circus, which was for Firebird, and I think it was late '84 or early '85. The dates are a bit vague nowadays. And it was a sideways scrolling platformer. I actually bumped into someone earlier who remembered it, which is quite amazing if you think about it after over 40 years. And I've got a little plaque of it that I was given.
Show us.
Yeah.
I got to say, Stuart has bought a bag of goodies and treasures and things, and he was very kindly showing me some of the stuff in there. So let's see the Circus plaque.
Yeah.
Oh, look at that, man. That's great.
I'll show you in a second. I was given this in 1984, I think it was, at the end of '84 by Firebird, and just as a thank you for creating the game for them, because it was one of their early games. I don't unfortunately have an access to put it up there, but hold on a second, I'll just show you this.
Do you want me to hold it? And you look. I mean, look at this, man. This is fantastic.
There's some 8-bit graphics for you. In the early days as well, it was so early that I had to do my own graphics, and I'm not an artist. There just wasn't an artist available at the time. Like I said, I was up in Aberdeen, didn't know anyone else. But I'm just starting to get to know other people. I didn't know any artists at the time. So I created the graphics, which are pretty simplistic. But back then, it was not too bad, as it were. And it had, if I remember correctly, it had something like 12 different levels to get to the end. And it was reasonably playable.
How old were you when you wrote Circus?
I think it was about 16 or 17.
I love this. I love the fact that it's kids doing this stuff. So how do you go from writing a game to it then being on a cassette, being in Boots, being in WH Smith's, from making the game at home to getting it published?
Right. Once I knew I had something that was reasonable, I basically wrote some letters off to all the existing games companies at the time, and Firebird were obviously, BT was who they really were. Were one of the companies I wrote off to. I didn't expect to get an answer from anybody, but they wrote back and went, "Oh, we really like this. We'd like to buy it off you." And that was really cool because I think I'd used an early assembler for that I managed to get hold of, which you loaded up by tape, because that was back in the days of tape decks. It took forever to load just up the assembler, let alone be able to code. So they gave me an upfront set of money for it, which was pretty reasonable for the time. And I got that, and then basically they said, right, send us the source code. It was all kind of done by mail at the time, because there wasn't really internet or anything. There was CompuNet at the time, but that was very limited. You couldn't really send anything in CompuNet. And that was just a bunch of Commodore 64 gamers going on and playing MUD and multi-user dungeons and things like that. Although I did find that, to give you an idea what I could do at the time, I did find a way into NatWest once upon a time, about the mid-80s. Because the security at the time wasn't great, and it was in early ways of getting onto systems that were on that. And I don't know how.
And what did you do with this
information?
talent?
I didn't do anything with it. I actually thought maybe I shouldn't be doing this, even back then.
Thought you were going to say global thermonuclear war.
Yeah, exactly. I'd like to play a game.
Just going off on a very slight tangent. So you found yourself in NatWest. Did you get really scared and go, oh my God, I'm going to get in trouble with the feds?
Yeah, I was trying to hack their passwords, and again, I can't remember what it was at the time, but they had some ridiculously simple password on their site, and I was one of the few guys who was using modems back then were incredibly slow, and the phone bills were incredibly expensive. It wasn't uncommon to get a phone bill of £300 or £400 for a quarter back then. Luckily, I was earning enough on games to pay for it. Otherwise, I think my family might have had a heart attack when they got the bills. I said, "Don't worry about it, I can cover it." But when I got in, you could actually see some admin level stuff on there, and I just got out straight away because I thought, no, this isn't for me. I'm positive, as it were. I don't want to be doing this. I tried it. It worked.
Yeah.
I'll get back out, and I've decided never to do that.
Well done. Okay, so going back, so Firebird right back, say, yeah, we'll take this, here's a few quid. That must have been amazing.
No, that was incredible. I mean, it was quite a lot of money at the time. And the first thing I did is actually bought a floppy disk drive, which was pretty good technology at the time. And all of a sudden, instead of going from like 20 minutes to load up the assembler or my code, and maybe it didn't load, and you had to repeat the tape and rewind, I had a very reliable floppy disk drive, which could also store an awful lot more on it. And the more equipment you had back then to make it easier, the more you got into programming, because you could do more quickly. And I also bought a more advanced assembler, where I programmed on one Commodore 64 and it sent the data down to another. The advantage of that was that you could write to more of the Commodore 64's memory, so you could write more complicated games, because they were quite simplistic to begin with, and slowly you discovered ways of making better and better use of that very limited amount of memory. Because 64K isn't a huge amount of memory to play with, but for the machines at the time, they were designed for it. And eventually you just got more and more creative with what you could do, and you could create some pretty big games with that. Yeah. You really could. I always say people on the spectrum would say that 64K was a lot at the time because they had less, and they managed to do really, really good games with 48K or even less, 16K in the beginning. But you know, everybody overcame the challenges at the time, and that's just what hooked you in. If you can overcome the challenges, what's next?
Back
What
to
can you create
problems.
next?
You were talking earlier on about problems and solutions and things, and I guess that's one. How do I cram more into this limited, finite space?
Oh, absolutely. And another thing we did, which I think was pretty common back then, was we wrote demos, which weren't so much games demos, but tech demos.
Right.
We made lots of things spin round in circles using sine tables and things like that, and try and split sprites to get more on screen, and working out, I remember the very first time I ever worked out on the Commodore 64 how to make the top of the screen stay still and the bottom of the screen do smooth scrolling. And I was kind of like blown away because I worked that all out myself. And another one of those, oh my God moments where you go, hang on a minute, I can do this. And I can keep up with the so-called professionals.
Yeah.
Well, they were professionals, but they were just people who'd had a chance to get 6 months, a year ahead of me at the time. And there weren't many at the time, but some people produced some stuff where you just want to try and emulate what they're doing.
Yeah. Andy, let's go back to your artillery style game.
Yeah.
I'm assuming that is what then progressed into Worms. When did you kind of make that leap from it being this thing that you were doing in the art room on the art computer to actually being what we would call Worms, I guess?
It's when it got banned.
Oh,
It was banned from school because people were skipping lessons to play it and everything.
wow, okay.
And at that point, a light bulb in my head went off. Because anything that's banned is at least worth pursuing.
Yeah.
It's usually good.
Except second reference today for heroin, but I don't know what's been mentioned. But yeah, of course, that creates an excitement, doesn't it?
Yeah, and that's when I thought, well, if it's been banned, if people are skipping lessons to play it, then it's worth pursuing. And back then, the only thing I wanted to do was make a game and hopefully get it published. So I turned around and told my form teacher, I went to a grammar school, so it was very much a production line. You will do this, you will do this, you will go to university, you'll get your degree. They didn't really ask you what you wanted to do. So I remember being made to feel really small, that I was a failure in some sense. But I thought, well, I can go to university anytime, there's no rush for this. Why go to university when there's no courses in game design? I've got a game here, I want to try, at least try. And so I told my form tutor, I'm not going to go to university, I'm going to try and get my game published instead. And he just turned around and, Andy, you're good, you're not that good.
Oh.
And it was like, nothing has driven me on more than that sentence, and I was determined to prove him wrong.
I had a very similar experience in a grammar school. I want to be an actor. You'll never be an actor. You've got no talent. And I was like, well, what actor tell you? But that's a crushing thing to say to a young person.
Yeah, no, it's like, I had two art teachers. One was my form tutor, who was the one who said that. And the other art teacher was the one who let me put the computer in the art room, the Amiga. So it's like I had good cop, bad cop going on. So whether this was some high-tech psychological test, psyop, or something to see what would happen, but it all turned out good in the end. But I remember when I went back over to school a few years later after Worms had come out, And the same form teacher who said I was good, not that good, he just walked up to me, stuck his hand out, and said, "Andy, we always knew you'd make it."
Oh, yeah.
So I just shook his hand and went,
Yes, I'm just going to go and get back in my Ferrari. When did the name Worms come? When did you realise these need to be very specific characters? That Worms is going to be a bit different. How did that come about?
well, its working title was Total Wormage.
Oh, okay.
Which was like a parody of Total Carnage, the arcade game.
Yeah.
But the change from tanks to characters, that was the most interesting thing, because the artillery game was like it was evolving on its own. Like I made them move, because artillery games are good, but they're very stationary, and they do get repetitive. So I made them move around, that opened the strategy up. I put water in for an instant kill, which opened the strategy up again. But at the same time, I was very into demos, as you were, and so I wrote a ripper called Jack, which was to get the graphics and the music out of demos and everything. So I wanted to listen to the music outside the demo.
Okay.
And then I wrote a ripper which would rip the modules, soundtracker modules. And then I realised, well, if you're ripping sound, you should always be able to look at the graphics. And so I wrote a graphics ripper, I put that in there as well. And one of my friends said, well, can you get the graphics out of Lemmings? And I went, probably not. But then to my surprise, it did.
Yeah.
And so for a laugh, I swapped the tanks to Lemmings to show my friend. And that was like a eureka moment.
Okay, yeah.
Because suddenly the game was a lot more appealing.
Yeah.
You know, because everyone had seen artillery games with tanks, but suddenly you had these characters in there, and it was funny. And because you have more direct control over characters, I thought I can do a lot here with the game. So after it was banned, I thought I'd do a rewrite, and about literally the only creature that hadn't been in the game was a worm back then, because none of them had been called Jim yet.
Yeah.
So it was, and I was really, really impressed with the animation in Lemmings, and I thought with worms, because I could, like when they go into the ground and go like a ruler and like do things like that, I thought I'd be able to create some humour that way.
Yeah.
And I just aspired to try and create. They needed to be small.
Yeah.
Because there was like 16 of them on screen at once. So I thought, well, look at the best, and the best example of that was Lemmings. So I thought, let's go for it. And started a complete rewrite to enter into the Amiga format competition, because Amiga format was the biggest Amiga magazine.
Yeah.
I thought that's how I'm going to get it noticed, and it wasn't noticed at all because it was disqualified because I didn't include the source code.
Oh no!
Yeah.
I knew that you had not done very well in the competition.
No,
I didn't realise
I only
it was
found
bad.
out just before Christmas. I was speaking to Simon from Acid Software. I'd never included the source codes.
But you only found out this.
Yeah, just before. I never knew why it hadn't. I thought that it got lost in the post or they just hated it. But it was properly disqualified because I didn't include the source code. I never thought to include the source code.
I love this. First of all, I love hearing about teenagers creating stuff in their bedrooms because I find it so thrilling that's how a lot of this industry started.
Yeah.
You guys are pioneers, But then the fact that you're still learning stuff. You got kicked out of the competition because you didn't do the source code. You only found that out recently. This is great. This is historical stuff that keeps coming up. We'll come to how it got published in a bit because it's a great story. Let's go back to you, Stuart. So Circus is done. Were you thinking, this is it? I'm the big man now. I'm in. Where was your head at after that?
To be honest, I don't think I went, I'm in. I think I thought, well, that's really good. I got in, but where do I go from here? Because it was a bit like, can I write something now that either they'll want again, because Firebird didn't exactly go, right, we'll have a 3-game license deal with you or anything like that. So I just carried on. I actually wrote for a few years after that. It was all working in the bed, writing stuff, sending it off to companies, and different companies went, yeah, I was lucky for quite a while. And different companies went, yeah, we'll take your game, and I did that for quite a while. But in doing that, I started going to game shows and things like this, but going down to London, to Olympia, things like that, and slowly but surely got to know other people who were doing the same thing. And in doing that, you make contacts, so that gives you an in elsewhere, or get to know people who want to, as it turned out, want to hire me. and I eventually got a proper job, as it were, doing the work, which is how I ended up working for companies who'd already got things like licenses. I ended up doing a lot of licenses over the years.
Give us some of the licenses, and what was that like when you're presented with, we want you to make a game of this?
Sometimes it was the game was already designed, in which case it was like, I'm the coder. Other times it was a bit like, well, we've got this license, but we haven't done anything at all with it at the moment. An example would be, bizarrely, Airwolf 2 in 1985 for Elite. They actually came to me and they went, right, we've got Airwolf 2, we want it to be a sideways scroller. We'd like it to, at the time, R-Type and I think its sequel Nemesis were big in the arcades, and they went, we want it to be kind of inspired by this, but they didn't have anything else, so they let me do the design, the coding, and of course the artwork, which was ridiculous at the time because the artwork turned out to be not bad. I was quite happy with it, but it wasn't as good as a professional artist. And I got that written, so there's an example of one, and that got published. And that's an example of one where I did more than I should have done on it. But once we got to the later ages, I started working for companies who already had the licenses, and quite often, most of the time, we'd be given the designs, or we'd be, as a team, we'd then start working on creating the designs, and we'd work out which one of us would do the coding. And obviously the artists did the art, it started getting that little bit more professional by then. And so example things like, say, in the late 80s I was working on were like cartoon licenses. I remember doing Count Duckula, Defenders of the Earth for Enigma Variations, and that feels like forever ago. That was with Darren, Mark Greenshields, people like that.
Hello.
Yeah, his name comes up quite a bit, doesn't it? He's been around forever in the industry. Yeah, and so we've known each other forever. We were teenagers when we started working together. And after that, where 5 of us formed a company called Twilight, which some people might have heard about. And we started getting our own licenses, and we got contracts from various companies like Ocean or High Tech, etc., US Gold and so on. And we got a lot of licenses to do things like film licenses like Cool World, which turned out to be not a particularly brilliant film. It was one of Brad Pitt's very, very early films that he did. As you pointed out, it's such an early film for Brad Pitt. I think he's 4th on the list.
He's listed 4th on IMDb.
He's listed 4th, and Kim Basinger and Gabriel Byrne were in it. But we did the 8-bit versions of that particular game. And we were given a rough design for it, and then we just fleshed it out at the company and wrote those versions. And they gave us all sorts of promotional stuff.
Well, you've got stuff in the
pieces,
folder.
yeah.
You've kept so much treasure. What have you got in that folder that you'd like to show
right,
us?
I'll hand it to you. I'll hand some of the stuff to you, not that bit, because the rest of it's Cool World. But you'll be able to see that they handed us some artwork and film and photos and so on, just to give us an idea of how to copy what was in the.
Okay, so we got some.
Yeah, and you can see that afterwards if they want to come up and see the little shots. But those were so that we could create the sprites and so on. But they then gave us little various pieces.
Young Brad Pitt.
Yeah, very young Brad Pitt in that shot. But basically, we were trying to repeat the characters when they were walking about in the game, and a lot of it was they had gone into a cartoon world, which helped to make. Which was good because it helped with the graphics at the time. So obviously, graphics were more limited.
Very careful with this. What
yeah,
are these?
These were lots of screenshots from the actual studio when they were filming, and again it was to give us an idea of the colour palette that we're trying to go for and various characters.
This one's just flown up. It's a picture of a Nazi. I don't quite know what.
Yeah, it was a very
fashionable
strange film, and possibly why it wasn't particularly successful. But it was an example of the kind of stuff that we were given to try and help design games, and. We went back to companies like Ocean and said, look, we've got this, and then they'd come back to us and say, we'd like to refine it this way or that way. And eventually you'd come up to a design, and then you'd start coding it, basically.
Listen, we've got about 25 minutes left, and we want to get some questions in. I could talk to you guys for all day, and I do want to come back. So you got kicked out of the competition with Worms. How did you then sell it?
Well, it's like I was working in managing a computer shop at the time. So I was basically, I was very lucky, very fortunate actually. It had an Amiga only shop. So all it sold was Amigas, and it was like about 5 minutes from my house. So I used to be in there all the time, and I ended up managing it. And then so I was basically staying up all night writing the game, the latest version of it, bringing a new one to playtest, and then people who come in the shop would playtest it. And that's how I refined it. And then after I saw the results of the Amiga format competition, I was just gutted. You know, I didn't expect to win, but I thought at least to be noticed. But I didn't know what had happened to it. It vanished without trace. So the ECTS was coming up in September in London. So I thought, right, my last effort, I'll force people to look at my game. I stuck a notice on the door saying, sorry, due to unforeseen circumstances, the shop won't be open today. And then just hopped on a train to London. I think it was probably Olympia or Wales Court, one of the two.
Yeah, that was the show back at the time.
Yeah, and Team 17 were top of my list because I was very passionate about the Amiga. I still am very passionate about the Amiga because the game was designed around the Amiga's hardware scrolling, the copper to do all the parallax and everything. And Team 17 was sort of the premier Amiga company, and they prided themselves on that. So they were top of my list to go and show them the game. And Martin was there, which sadly, as we know, we lost Martin at the end of last year, but which was very sad. But my overriding memory of him is someone who he was prepared to take a chance on my weird little game. As I was loading it up, I said, "You're not going to like this. It's a bit odd." Like this.
What a great salesman you are!
But he did like it, and I demoed it very quickly. Within 5 minutes, he just said, "Do you want it published?" Which I was convinced was a wind-up. And they invited me up to Team 17's offices the next week.
How old were you at this point?
I was 21.
Okay, yeah.
And I've been doing the game for about 3-4 years at that point. But until I actually went up to Team 17, that's when it became real. Because I was convinced it was a wind-up until then, until contracts and everything came into play.
I just think it's magic, and I've had a very few dealings with Team 17. They've always been so generous to me. It really feels like it was and continues to be to a certain extent very supportive, creative place.
It's as they say, it all stems back to the bedroom programmer days, and everyone there. And I remember just people would be in their rooms at Team 17, ordering pizza in, staying up all night, listening to music, coding, doing the graphics, making music, and it was just such a creative place. And I was in shock, because this is all I'd ever dreamt of, and for it to come true was just amazing.
It must have been amazing. It's like dreaming, I want to be a pop star, and then suddenly you're on top of the pops. You're on top of the pops with this game. I have my theories on why I think Worms is so successful and is such a great game. My theory is not necessarily that important. Why do you think 30 years later we're still talking about it? You show most people Worms, show my kids Worms, they'll know what it is. What do you think made it such a great game?
Well, thank you for saying it.
It is. It's wonderful.
No, I think it's just down to the philosophy of what I wanted to try and create. One, I wanted to create a game that wouldn't repeat, because it was originally just so I had something to play instead of doing schoolwork. So you didn't want it to repeat. You didn't want to get bored of it. So it basically had 4 billion levels. So, that's a start. But then also, when I was in the shop, one of the things where I realised that it was onto something is that one of the kids would come in, and he'd come in every day to play the latest version of it. And then one time his dad came in, and his dad sat down with him, and they were both playing the game for a few hours. And I found that really encouraging, that as I think the best ideas aren't limited to age. You should be able to I'm very much from the Nintendo school of game design, and video games are toys, and the best toys are ones which appeal to different generations and appeal to all of them. So when the dad sat down with his kid and was playing it for hours, I was really proud of that. And I say it's very hard to take yourself outside the game. Once you're so close to something, it's very hard to think what someone new to it will think. That's why when I was loading up for Martin, I said you're not going to like this because I was so close to the game.
Yeah.
It's really hard to see it from an outsider's point of view.
And you'd had the rejection of the competition as well.
This is literally my last shot at getting it published.
We talked about Stuart's first paycheck kind of coming in, and I think it is a big thing for any young person, their first paycheck. When you got your first, I'm not asking for numbers, but when you got your first Team 17 Worms paycheck, what was that like for you?
Well, with Team 17, basically like mine were royalty based.
Right.
Because the way I saw it, if the game was huge, it would be huge. If it wasn't, it wasn't. So I went for royalties, and I didn't actually. I got a little advance to help me finish the game, because the Team 17 spent a year porting it to other things, and I spent the year finishing the Amiga one and polishing all that up. But just it was, to be honest, it was weird making money from something you love. Like, it didn't seem like a job or anything. It was just like it was basically a dream come true. Yeah. And Team 17 have always looked after me, which I really appreciate. As you hear some horror stories around in the 80s and 90s where people didn't get the people were meant to be paid royalties and didn't get anything at all, or they got ripped off, or the company went down before they got paid. So Team 17 have always looked after me, which I really appreciate.
Glad you went for that royalty deal over a flat fee?
Yes.
Good. Stuart, let's go back to you. So you're now programming, you're now getting stuff, you're working for different companies. At what point did it settle in? Oh yeah, this is my career now. I'm doing this. I'm proper like the other people that were a few months ahead of you.
I think it was reasonably early on when I started doing, for instance, Airwolf for Elite. Elite were a big company at the time, and it was just the fact that they wanted me to work for them.
Yeah.
You suddenly realise that you're good enough, because you're always, thinking to yourself, "Oh, am I good enough? The next thing I write might not be as good," and they might suddenly discover, that called imposter syndrome.
Yeah, very
you
much
have
so.
that all the time. But you kept going to the enthusiasm that you had in your head and how much you loved video games, because I think you have to love it, because sometimes it can be, when you're trying to finish a project, or as you've said, when you're trying to refine something, if you get given the time, you can spend a very long time doing the same thing over and over, just trying to make sure that you get it tweaked very, very slightly.
As I believed, I still do actually, that anything good has a flow to it, whether it's a film, music, or a game. Things have this, it's hard to describe, but if something feels right, there's nothing wrong with it, so it's good. So with Worms, I spent ages, like if a message was on screen for slightly too long, if you're playing something or watching something, if something annoys you, there's something wrong with it. And so then I'd stop and say, something's bugging me here, and then you'd work out what it was and fix it. So that message is on the screen slightly too long. The worms are like they're being thrown too far by that explosion. That's annoying. And so I'd spent ages refining it until eventually it feels like it's basically the feel of the game.
Yeah.
And if it feels right, then it usually is right. That makes all sense.
No, it does. It does make sense. And what I'm getting from both of you is the passion that you have for coding, for entertaining, for making sure stuff is as good as you can make it.
Yeah, I mean, you really want other people to enjoy it. You're like any form of entertainment, I suppose. You want other people to enjoy it and have a smile on their face and remember it. We didn't always get the time to refine things. Quite often in contracts we go, right, here's the deadline. And we go, well, like an extra 4 weeks at least. And sometimes they'd extend it. A lot of the time back then they just wouldn't. Yeah. And you had to try and make it as good as you could for the time, which was annoying because you knew what you were aiming for, and quite often you couldn't quite get to that.
I got into a lot of trouble with just constantly adding things.
Really?
The sheep and the banana bomb went in quite late. And the banana bomb is going back to DMA's talk. The banana bomb is a tribute to Hard Guns, because in Hard Guns, if you played it to death, there was a secret banana gun in Hard Guns.
Okay.
And so I wanted that banana bomb in Worms was a tribute to that.
Yeah.
But I with Worms Director's Cut especially, I was woken up in the hotel with a knock on the window, So I was on the ground floor of the hotel, so somebody just bang, bang, bang on the window and said, "We're releasing the game now." I was basically dragged in there and basically had to. So I will constantly just add things. I'm sure you're the same.
Yeah, given the chance, you can keep going with things.
Because
I think you have to be built a certain way to do that as well, which is part of the way we think. I'm pretty sure.
I do want to take some questions in a bit, and I want to talk about what I'm seeing at the back there, which is absolutely insane, but I love it. We'll come to that in a minute. And I'm now going to ask you to sum up 35 years in 5 minutes, which I know is impossible. But so what have you been doing, Stuart, since the mid-80s? You're still involved with coding, I know that much.
Yeah, I mean, I kept in the games industry up till about...
And feel free to bring props out as well to show us, to tell the story.
Yeah, that's, for anybody who remembers it, that was Alfred Chicken. Yeah, everybody remember that. I actually wrote the Super Nintendo version, and there was an unreleased, so Frank would like that, an unreleased version of the Mega Drive one, which I actually converted this to the Mega Drive, and it was all done apart from the music. And then we got that, the Mega Drive's on its way down, we don't think we can quite make enough out of it now. And I had refined it. I'd spent time refining the Mega Drive one to fix all the little things that I didn't like about the movement and the patterns and so on. The Mega Drive version was actually, I think, noticeably better, and it never got released, which was a real shame. But yeah, I mean, I kept going till about 2000, 2001 in the industry, and then just because I was getting older and because I'd been doing it for so long, I went off and did other things for a while. I did some random other games and so on. Like for THQ, I wrote this, which was Jay the Lion on the Game Boy Color. I think I did that about 2001. And that basically, for those who know, is Jay the Lion is about as famous in Germany as, for instance, I don't know, Scooby-Doo is here or whatever. So that sold a lot of copies. And I did a couple of different games for them. And I think The Land That Time Forgot, which was a dinosaur-based game for them as well at roughly the same time. After that, I moved out of the games industry, and I love coding, so I've just gently stuck to coding over the years. And nowadays, I program for Apple and Android devices, but I do business software, which is a bit more boring. But because of the way things were with the companies that I was involved in, it was either you earned a fortune in some years, and then you had to temper it with earning practically nothing the year after. So you had this roller coaster of, I've made money or haven't, I've made money or haven't. And just like I got older and had mortgages and responsibilities and things, I eventually started getting a more steady job, which I've done ever since. But it's still coding, and I still look at games, and I still overanalyze things. I always will, from that point of view, and occasionally I suspect I will go back if trouble with life gets in the way nowadays. I'd go back and I'd analyse things. I still play games, but I'm a real big fan of the 1980s arcade games. I've still got some arcade. I'm the kind of guy who's got arcade machines in his house, and I like the ones that are really, really hard. The ones that most people pick up and go, "This is impossible." You know, things like Robotron, Defender Stargate, stuff like that. Most people go, "How do you even have that many fingers?" and so on. But I really like stuff like
Never
that.
tempted? One evening, you're up, you got a glass of whiskey, and think, "Well, do you know what? I'm gonna have a go at writing a game again."
I have thought of that occasionally, and I did think of starting on a few different years. But like I said, life gets in the way, and it just seems to always stop you from doing it. And then you suddenly discover it's a few months later, you're not quite as enthusiastic at the time, and then a while later you get back into it. There's a good chance I'll probably go back and write something 8 or 16-bit again, because I did quite a lot of different machines over time. I think my main love, if you like, was the Commodore 64, because I spent the entire 1980s and the very beginning of the 1990s writing for the Commodore 64. It was amazing once you'd written quite a lot of games on it, what you could get out of that machine, considering how limited the hardware was. The things that you could make it do that it wasn't designed to do was quite incredible, and people have pushed it like way beyond where they should. And that feeling, as you were saying right at the start, of being able to do things and maybe for the first time do it when you haven't seen anyone else do it, whatever, is an absolutely amazing feeling that I don't think people get so much nowadays.
It's like one of the best memories of when I was at Team 17 actually was because I was spending a year finishing and polishing the Amiga one, and they were spending that year doing the other versions. So somebody had knocked up a Jaguar demo, because the Jaguar was a lot more powerful. it had worms at that point only had one layer of water.
Right.
They added with the extra power of the Jaguar, they added 5 layers of animated water. And I looked at it and thought that looks so much better. There's no way I'm having the Amiga version release without that. So I locked myself up in my little room. And then when you just suddenly work it out, because I realised that with the copper, because on the Amiga, the best feature of the Amiga for me was the copper, which you could do so many tricks. It was just basically hardware tricks, and you could stretch things and squash things and do all sorts of things. And I realised that I could not only have like 5-layer parallax, but I could animate the water using the copper, which I didn't know anyone had actually done before. So instead of drawing the water, because worms had to run at 50 frames a second, it was very important for me for it to be that like. The games just feel better like that. Yeah. So that's why the 64 was really good, because generally with the hardware scrolling and the hardware sprites, everything ran in a frame.
Yeah, it did. You had to do that really, otherwise your game wasn't good enough. Really.
Yeah, and in the demo scene as well, anything that ran at half frame rate in the demo scene was like.
Yeah, it didn't do very well, did it?
Chris Blythe, who did the animations, the 3D animations, I said he was a huge Amiga fan and still is as well. And I got the parallax water working. I went and showed him, and he just went, "You should be able to do that." And I go, and it had vertical parallax on the water as well. So when the camera moved up, and only 2 people have ever noticed it. But Amiga Worms has vertical parallax as well as horizontal, and none of the other versions do. And like you say, when you pull off something which you're not meant to do, and the Amiga was amazing for that.
It goes back to what you were saying about problem solving, and also, we will take questions. I like that thing of him saying, well, you shouldn't be able to do that. And it feels like that teacher saying, well, you're good, but you're not that good. You should be able to do that, and you prove them wrong. First of all, step forward, young man, and show the room this absolute beast. Look at this.
There's a bit of a story with this.
Come and tell everyone your bit of a story with this.
So what we got here, Andy, we got
Oh, hang on, because the speakers.
we got the speakers there. There we go. I'm Dave from Southwest Amiga Group, and basically Andy came in contact with us, and we helped resurrect his poorly original developers with a kid.
Oh, is that what this is?
This is the new improved version.
Yeah.
Oh my
So look,
God!
one of the
I'll hold this. Go on.
it's one of the original playtesters. Back when the game was called Total Wormage, he commissioned this, and so I think it was somewhere in Germany did it, and gave it to me this year for my birthday present, and it's the best present I've ever had.
Isn't that
And so
stunning?
now it's been very kindly. My original Amiga is now transferred into the new case, and that's now the official Worms Amiga.
Can I hand you that? Because I'm really worried I'm
It's a
going to
bit
drop it.
delicate, and I'll be...
That's stunning. That is beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's great.
Yeah, and that's got the updates. I'm working on an update to like Worms Director's Cut, which was the AJ version.
Yeah.
So after 30 odd years, I'm getting back into it now, and so the version on there is the latest one. So we'll get that. If we show that a bit later.
Yeah, fantastic. That's brilliant. Thank you so much, man. Right. Questions. Has anyone got any? Are you running around, or shall I run around? You happy to? Yeah, I'll let you grab.
I just need a mic that works.
Okie dokie. You take that one, and then we can.
Sorry,
can all
folks,
share.
microphone problems.
There we go. Right.
Who was the first gentleman? There it was.
Hello.
You take.
You mentioned bumping into someone who remembered your game, Circus.
Oh yes.
In the years between the sort of old Commodore machines, people moving on from them, normal people, moving on to other things. In the intervening years since then and now, how aware were you of the fact that there's still a bunch of weirdos still using their Commodore machines and very much enjoying the work that you produced all those years ago?
Oh, I'm definitely aware that there are still enthusiast clubs for not just the Commodore 64, but all the Amstrads and all the early machines. In fact, probably every machine at some point or other. So it's really nice and it's flattering, and it goes along with what we wanted to do, which is what we wanted to entertain people. And that seems to have been really successful over the years. I was coding for 20 odd years, I think. And it was just over 20 years doing that. So hopefully in that time I produced a few things that people like to really play or keep playing. There were some obscure things I wrote, which were sometimes they weren't so great because of deadlines and so on, and other times you'd get something that was really, really good. I did a Defender clone, which was for Zeppelin games, and it was only a $2.99 game, but I think I got the gameplay in that absolutely spot on because I had a bit of time to refine it. And it was a copy because I was inspired by Defender, using a helicopter. One of the things I always remember is that, in a way, one of my programming heroes from the early days was Eugene Jarvis, the guy that wrote Defender and Robotron and stuff like that. And I always remember from an interview he said, which helped me a lot in coding and my philosophy on things over the years. He said, write something where you give the players competing targets of what they've got to do. And he said, I always wrote something, for instance, like in Defender, you had to survive by shooting absolutely everything, but at the same time, you had to try and save the people. And he did the same in Robotron. So that was his philosophy. And you had to decide and create your own strategy out of that, whether you wanted to just blast away like mad and save one last human so you get the next level, or whether you wanted to save as many humans as possible, which was pretty difficult in later levels. So that kind of philosophy is really, really good and stuck with me. And in answer to your question, yeah, it's really, really good. And I was aware that people play, not just mine, because I know people who do, but everybody's games who was around in the 80s in particular. I think if I was going back to a favourite decade, I would say mine was the 80s. Yeah. Cheers.
Yes, sir. Yes, the gentleman, the elderly gentleman over there.
Thank
Yes.
you very much. The greying gentleman, Iain. Thank you. That's fascinating. I love the fact that it was a conversation between. Are you mates, by the way?
No, we just met for the first time.
I think that's really nice. That's a really good. Well done, Iain. You're great at introducing people. Very nice. I have a question for you, Andy. You said that you really hated A-level maths. It was, I quote, doing my head in. But I want to ask you: is your understanding of maths was actually that one of the reasons why Worms is so good? The way that the projectiles are based on mathematical.
Oh yeah, no. It definitely had some uses, and it was also in Amiga Worms, the computer players, they're actually solving an equation, whereas in the other versions of Worms they just use brute force to basically run through every possible combination and then decide on the best one to use, whereas the Amiga wasn't fast enough to do that. So the only way to do it was to solve this equation. It's the most complicated equation I've ever solved in my life. It was all over a load of post-it notes. And again, it's one of those things when you've managed it, you can pat yourself on the back, and it's a great feeling. Because again, Worms is primarily, it's always been designed as a multiplayer game, but I wanted to have that one-player aspect to it still, and it was fun solving the equation.
I reckon we got time for maybe three more questions.
Yeah, we've got about 2-3 minutes left.
All right. Well, let's get. I know this gentleman had a hand up and over there. So we go to this chap here in the shorts first.
Hello. I just wanted to ask: have you been involved in development of any of the other Worms games since the first one?
Well, I did Worms 1, obviously. Worms Director's Cut, Worms 2. I left during Armageddon because it was, in my head, to me, it was too similar to Worms 2. Worms 2 didn't get a console release, whereas so for console players it was quite a big jump. And Worms 2 and Worms Armageddon were based on Worms Director's Cut. But it was called Armageddon because it was meant to be the last Worms game. There's only meant to be 3 of them. And so I wanted to, there's a lot of things I wanted to do, but there's pressure then to get the game out by Christmas and release schedules and everything. So I wasn't able to do it. So I thought then that was the time to step back. I've still been in regular contact with Team 17 and also working on the update for the 30th anniversary year and everything.
Yeah, I was going to ask you. Sorry. And what is your opinion of some of the later versions in the franchise since you left?
No, I think they've always been very careful with it. There's been a lot, they've always respected what the game was and everything. So I've got a very good relationship with Team 17. If I had to give an opinion on them, I think the game was designed around 2D, so I think there's elements of the game which don't work quite as well in 3D. Just from aiming to chain reactions and collisions between worms and things like that. But one of the things I think which is really nice is because when Worms came out, every game was going 3D. The PlayStation had just come out, and Sony America originally didn't want to release Worms at all because it was 2D. And I think it's nice we've come full circle now, as 2D games aren't seen as old hat anymore. 2D games can stand side by side with 3D games, and whether you've got 3D Mario's distinct from 2D Mario, and there's no judgment anymore. And I think that's a sign of the industry maturing, basically. Games don't have to be 3D; they can still be 2D. And like you said, the 80s and the 90s, and the 8-bit and 16-bit eras. For me, there's basically so many good ideas, just ideas everywhere. And it was a time of experimentation, and I'm really happy I sort of grew up with the evolution of this medium. I think it's been amazing to go from Pong and see how everything changed. It's been amazing. I feel really lucky.
Let's get one more question.
Yeah, I think I might have sort of answered my question already, but my personal favourite version of Worms is actually the PlayStation Portable version. Is Open Warfare? That's my personal favourite. My question was going to be to you, which is the worst version of Worms? I think you might have just suggested it's Worms 3D.
That's a slightly loaded question with the word worst. Let's say the one perhaps you're least keen on.
I know, it's like, to me, just from the way it was designed, the one which I'm most partial to is Director's Cut, just because that's when the humour and the gameplay, everything seemed to click, and it was originally only going to be an AJ upgrade, just make the game look a bit prettier, give the Amiga the best version it could. But then suddenly I was having all these ideas from Super Sheep to Concrete Donkeys, baseball bats, and the Holy Hand Grenade, which I was really chuffed to have the Hallelujah Chorus, because I grew up on Monty Python. But the Hallelujah Chorus before the explosion, that still makes me chuckle. And I'd rather, I think in the other ones, they all have different strengths, because I think that's the other thing, they haven't just been milking the game, they've been experimenting with different versions of Worms and doing different things. But the one I'm most partial to is Director's Cut, and it's been nice to return to it, to do a little free update for people.
Stuart, any final thoughts before we? Are we signing? Are they signing stuff? After? Yeah. Okay. Any final thoughts, and then we'll get some signatures.
You could carry on talking about stuff like this all day long, because there's such a history of things that we did over the years and stories to tell and so on. But it's hopefully it carries on nowadays, and whereas I'm not particularly in the games industry nowadays, and I'm thinking of going back to coding now. There you go. Hopefully nowadays people, even though the power of the machines is so much greater and it's easier to produce certain things and so on, there are people out there who are just as enthusiastic about producing really good quality games, because there are a lot of them out there, but there are some people who just still really care about making sure that playability is right and the entertainment for people is right, and I think that's really important. So that's my final thoughts on it from that point of view. But I've had a blast over the years, over the decades that I was in the games industry. I wrote and got to write things that got published and are there forever in many cases. I got to do a lot of travelling, met a lot of really nice people, met a lot of really nice famous people when you went to shows and you went to parties to do the release of games or whatever. So stories to tell that a lot of people don't get to do, because you've done just so many what I think of as daft things because I was in the games industry.
Final thought, I think I think it's just been a pleasure, like you say, to make something which other people enjoy and put a smile on their face. It is the best feeling in the world, and You can still see, and it's such a creative industry.
It is.
So I think one of the games which I'm always mention is Katamari Damacy, which was just inspiration, just like lightning in a bottle. Like how someone came up with that and nailed it from the look, the sound, the music, the gameplay, just in one go. And he now I think he left the game industry after the second one to design playgrounds. And I think that's just brilliant. I think that's just brilliant. And it's because I always saw like Worms as like a physics playground. And I wanted like, even if you didn't play the game right, you could still have fun with the physics, and you could still bury your worms just for the hell of it, or build a house for the hell of it. And even if you weren't playing the game correctly, you could still have fun with it. And so in effect, I really sort of empathise with like what he was trying to do. And yeah, I just feel really lucky actually.
Yeah.
That's the
I do too.
I think that's a beautiful point to end on. Genuinely, I could talk to you all day, and I think I consider you pioneers. You know, this industry that we now know. You guys started it by sitting in your bedrooms and having a dream, and here we are. It's been a real pleasure. Let's have a round of applause for Andy and Stuart, please. Thank you. And we're going to be signing some stuff. I'll let you get on with signing stuff. Sorry, I jumped in front of you. I'm so sorry. Lovely to see you.
But Brighton was where I had to stay, because I lived in Harrogate at the time. I lived in Harrogate at the time, but I spent 4 months living in Brighton while we were finishing off writing the game, the Super Nintendo version.
There we go. I'm really sorry.
Sometimes came home